Hey Internet, today we're going to look at how to mix an orchestra. So determining what we want to do, some of the underlying concepts and philosophies that go behind our decision-making process, and then all of the things that we need to consider that influence our decisions in order to achieve what we want. I have a quick PowerPoint I put together that goes into all of that, so let's just dive right in. All right, let's dive into how you would mix an orchestra for an orchestral music track. I also want to draw attention to the point there, rules of thumb, not necessarily rules to follow. All of this stuff are ways that you can do things, but what's more important is understanding the reasoning behind these ways of doing things, so then that way you can make the best decisions for yourself and the projects you're working on in the future. One way that you can treat mixing an orchestra is by panning for realism. So emulating the experience of seeing an orchestra live or a rock band live or what have you it happens to be. In this case, you're just emulating what it is in any other scenario. So for this, we're in a concert hall. First violins, second violins are on the left. Cellos and double bass are on the right. Violas are in the center, and then you can see where everything else is located on here. And also, for those that aren't familiar with audio terms, panning is referring to, in a stereo system, essentially where that instrument is placed. So if I have something panned hard left, we're only going to hear that sound source from the left monitor or speaker and not at all from the right. If I have something panned hard right, we're only going to hear it in the right speaker, not the left. If we have it panned anywhere in the middle, we'll hear it through both, but the loudness will change depending on where exactly you have it placed between the two monitors or speakers that you're using. So panning for realism, that's one option. Another option is also panning for, mixing and going for a sort of more of a clarity electronic music file focused philosophy. So in this, we're not concerned with being realistic. We don't want to emulate or replicate what it sounds like being in a concert hall and hearing an orchestra, but we want to think about what makes things easiest from a clarity and aesthetic standpoint in terms of a mix. So one of our chief considerations is making sure that we can distinctly hear between two different instruments, even if timbrally they're very similar to one another. So in this case, if it's difficult for us to distinguish between our first violins and second violins, we probably don't want to have them located next to each other in terms of panning. What'll make it easier to hear both separate instruments is to have violins panned hard left and the other section of violins panned hard right. If they sound very similar but are separated physically, it's much easier to hear between them. And that also goes into the actual depth. So if we look at panning for realism, certain instruments are located certain places, both left and right, as well as forward and backward on stage. This is true in our alternative panning. So a lot of this tends to focus on separating instruments that are similar in terms of frequency, both in terms of depth and in terms of panning. And we'll get into how to create this depth aspect or how to affect this depth aspect with the next slide, which is focusing on reverb. So every single thing that we hear is a combination of both direct sound, so sound coming directly from the source and going directly to your ear, as well as reflected sound, or sound that bounces off all of the different surfaces and takes a number of pathways before it eventually reaches your ear. How we replicate that in terms of a mix is by using different amounts and qualities of reverb. If something is very wet with reverb, that means we're hearing primarily that simulated reflected sound, while if something is very dry, we're hearing primarily that very direct sound with very little reverb applied. And we can apply certain amounts of reverb to give different sensations or feelings or effects of something being further back or forward in a mix. That combined with the quality of loudness, just how loud something is, can make something seem very far away as opposed to up close. Think about it. If you hear someone pluck a guitar right next to your ear, you hear a lot of the guitar string and relatively little of the room, right? But if you, say, are standing 40 feet away and someone plucks the string, it's a lot quieter, and you probably hear a lot more of the reverb of the room itself as opposed to the guitar. So another thing to keep in mind when you're mixing, how far left and right is something, how far forward and back is something placed as well. Additionally, we also want to think about the areas of the frequency spectrum that are most vital for each instrument that we're hearing. So you can see here, certain colors are assigned to higher and lower areas of the frequency spectrum, and depending on the type of instrument, they tend to live in certain areas. And one of our responsibilities as a mixing engineer is to isolate the frequencies that are ultimately the most vital to get across the effect of that instrument. If we have a lot of excess noise for these instruments and they aren't really adding to the character of the instrument itself, it can make it difficult to achieve clarity between different elements, and it will just make that instrument sound not all that good. Once you get into this process, do not be worried if an instrument sounds bad on its own, because ultimately we're going to combine all of these instruments, and what matters is how everything sounds when it's all combined. So if you're not sure about what frequencies are the most vital for all of these orchestral instruments, here's some general ballparks here, and I have another slide that goes into specific frequencies as well. So a lot of this is finding out where the instruments live, what are the important qualities of that instrument, and bringing those out, and then getting rid of all of the excess aspect of that sound that you don't want. And this is used through EQ shapes, filters such as a high pass filter we have there, or say like a shelf we have beneath there, and then we have somewhat of a notch or band pass there off to the right. But this is essentially getting rid of all of the aspect of that sound that we don't want while maintaining what we do. That way it makes it easiest to hear clarity, difference between these different elements, and then additionally we're adding an amount of reverb for not only aesthetic creative purposes, but also to create that sense of depth. So ultimately, there is no right answer. You need to think about what you're doing and what your intent is. Am I emulating something that already exists? Do I want to create something that's almost ignoring how it exists in the physical world? And then how do I achieve that? So keep all of that in mind when you're making choices for your mix, and these are some ways that you can go about beginning that decision-making process when you're mixing for orchestras. Hope this video has been helpful. If you are interested in game audio implementation, sound design, goodness, getting into your email inbox every once in a while and seeing some YouTube content as well, please hit subscribe or leave a comment if there's a question that I can help answer for you. And thanks for watching. Bye.